Hey guys, I'm back again doing another spoiler-free review. This is like the third one in this series I've done, but this one is going to be a little different because not only am I talking about one movie I saw in theaters recently, I'm talking about two movies I saw in theaters recently. Now, if you're like me, you went into the theater this month thinking there's not really that much to watch. All the December releases had just been pushed out, and all of the releases coming up are a little bit out. All the announcements for the big 2024 releases, not much gets released in January. So you're like, man, what can I watch? What is even the point of going out to the theater right now? But just before the year ended, and just as the year began, I went out to the theater twice and watched Ferrari and the Iron Claw, and I was super impressed by both of these movies, so I wanted to talk about both of them and encourage you guys to go catch them in theaters if you want to and if you can, before they leave. Again, these are going to be unscripted thoughts, talking through different points about both movies, and they are going to be spoiler-free, to just kind of encourage you or discourage you to go see these in theaters. Obviously, this time, I'm going to encourage you to go see this in theaters. But let's get into it, starting with the first one I watched, which was Ferrari. So yeah, on December 30th or 31st, I forget which, me and my brother went out to the theater to go watch Ferrari. We're both pretty big Michael Mann fans. Heat, Collateral, stuff like that are fantastic films. We haven't seen all of his work, but we were really excited to be able to catch one of his movies in theaters, especially being that from what we worked out, I think this is his first movie in theaters in almost 10 years, which is crazy. And on top of that, this was the first Michael Mann movie that I've seen personally, not his first that he's done, that is not a crime movie. It's a biopic racing person movie. It's not really a racing movie, but there is racing. One of the big things I really took away from this movie are its themes. I think they're really beautifully crafted throughout the film. I think kind of the way that this movie starts its setup and just how much it has to get through really helps the race and everything that happens with that, as well as Ferrari's family drama, which is, you know, the central part of the movie, to play out in a really unique way about masculinity, industry, war, racing. It has some really cool things to say, and it knows exactly how to say them. It's on a tight, straight, narrow line, and I think it kind of blows it out of the water. I was stunned when I finished this movie, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. On top of that, the cast here is phenomenal. I think it's really funny. People make fun of Adam Driver for this, which, like, I understand, because the Italian accents throughout this film are extremely hit or miss. But I do genuinely enjoy Adam Driver's performance as Ferrari. I think he brings some interesting depth to the character. Plus, in that opening scene, he looks really goofy with the race goggles and everything. But I genuinely really connected to his character and got behind what he was doing more so than I do a lot of biopic characters, especially one that holds this much, like, context and weight, which Ferrari definitely does. He's this character who I've seen even in biopics portrayed several times, and always in a very, like, big legend status. And I think Adam Driver, as well as just the script for this film, do a really fantastic job of bringing that down to human status. This shows you just a slice of the real Ferrari's life, well, the real Ferrari's life, because, you know, it's a biopic. They make their own decisions with it. But I think that's fantastic. But honestly, even more impressive than Adam Driver in this is Penelope Cruz. She was so good in this. She really brings a lot of the tension and makes a lot of the film work. In general, most of the film just revolves around these two characters, but Penelope Cruz and Adam Driver being really strong, especially off of each other, is not all the film has to offer when it comes to cast, because the entire supporting cast is fantastic. I really love especially a lot of the racing team that we get. Like, each of them, they're not super focused on, but they have such strong personalities and characterizations that get you to care about them really, really fast. And there's just so much to love and to dive into when you watch this movie. I'm totally blanking on her name, but the actress who plays Ferrari's mistress also fantastic. She brings this really interesting, very modern feel to the telling of the story, and just in general, the cast blows it out of the water. On top of the cast, one of the big highlights for me personally is just the way this movie looks. Michael Mann is pretty much the king of digital filmmaking, and I'm serious about that. I cannot think of any other director off the top of my head besides maybe Scorsese who has such an interesting and strong use of digital filmmaking as digital filmmaking. Some of Michael Mann's films straight up should not be on film, and he uses that digital quality to super unique effect. And I was interested to see how a lot of his stylistic design and direction would work on this movie, being that it's a, period piece biopic. But honestly, I think it works super well. The movie always looks good. The movie's always well lit. There's a lot of really nice low lighting, but you can consistently see everything you need to. Characters' faces are always well lit. And really, the cinematography and editing bring so much power to this movie, both in the slower scenes when it's just a lot of drama, but then especially during the racing scenes, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. But the editing and cinematography really do just bring you straight into the film. I was super engaged once the film got going. And speaking of being engaged, the racing. The racing is just... it is incredible. Like, seriously, I'm not a big racing fan. In fact, oftentimes in action movies and stuff, car chases are my least favorite part of the entire movie. I don't know. I know there's always that whole, like, car chases and car crashes are inherently cinematic, but that's just not it for me. The magic of cinema is not cars, usually, for me. But this race, and the way it's shot, and the way they used focal length of their lenses, and pushes, and editing, and everything, makes this some of the most interesting and engaging racing I've seen, especially being that they really take their time to get to the race. So by the time you get to the race, and all the weight that the race brings, especially stuff that I'll get to in a second as well, it just is so good. I was on the edge of my seat for this racing, which is not something I would normally say about racing. Some of the best racing I've ever seen, which also brings me to my next point, which is spoiler-free, the scene. If you've seen the movie, you know what the scene is. I'm not going to spoil it, hopefully, but it is one of the most viscerally shocking moments I think I've seen in a movie theater. Because, like, it's coming, and you've got this theme going on throughout the movie of this weight of death and the replaceability of people. That's kind of the entire thing the movie is doing. But there's just one specific scene during the race that I still describe as one of just the most, like, powerful uses of on-screen gore that I've ever seen. So if you do not have a strong stomach for gore, I definitely would not suggest this movie, even though you wouldn't think that was the case. But yeah, this is just gut-punching gore that is there for just a brief moment, and the movie moves on, and it uses it to punctuate its themes in just an incredible way. When we hit that scene, that's when I knew that I was really liking what this movie was doing. Then subsequently, the rest of the ending, where it kind of quiets down, is also fantastic. I love the final moments of this movie so much, which again also brings me to my next thing, which is my issues with the film. I don't think this is a perfect film. I don't think either of these films that I'm talking about are perfect films, but they are really good. But honestly, the pacing and kind of the engagement in the first half is a little shaky. I had a lot going on in my mind. I still have a lot going on, just like, I don't know, I'm stressed out about a lot of stuff. And usually that's a really nice thing when I'm going to the theater, because when I go and watch a movie, I just completely forget about everything and watch the movie and get pulled into the movie. And that did happen, but not as much for the first half. I actually found myself kind of fighting to stop just going in and thinking and kind of tuning out the movie. So that could be just because I was especially stressed that night, but that's not a normal thing that I like to see from my movies, and it really feels like they have to pack in so much of just exposition and fact and character setup to the first half to get to the context and themes that they want to, that I honestly kind of wish they had done the structure a little differently or made the film a little longer, because you can't really cut anything out. It's already like bare bones to what it needs to be. I don't think this is a huge problem, but it definitely does take away from the viewing experience. The front end is just a little too dry and long, but the second half of the movie is phenomenal. I love this movie. I give it a 4.5 out of 5. You should go check it out. The next movie, as I mentioned, that I wanted to talk about is The Iron Claw. I went and saw this yesterday. Like, I literally went and watched this yesterday. Again, this is going to be spoiler-free, but I think you should definitely go see The Iron Claw if you can handle what it's going for. This is truly one of the heaviest films that I have seen in a while. I've seen quite a few heavy films, but this one, man, I felt like sobbing when this film ended. And that's not its only strong suit. It's not just a sad fest. This movie knows what it wants to say, knows what it wants to be, and is also a really powerful biopic, which I'm not usually the biggest biopic fan, and here I am praising 2 biopics out in theaters right now, which I think is really funny, but I was not expecting this from The Iron Claw. I had heard good things about it, obviously, but this just blew my mind. It's directed by Sean Durkin, I think is how you say his name, and I've never seen any of his movies. I think he only has 2 or 3 feature-length films out, which, that being said, this is an incredible film to come out from a relatively new director. The direction is really, really clear, really, really solid, as well as the cast. The cast in this film is great. Zac Efron is making his more or less screen return after everything that happened. He's been in a couple movies here and there. He was in Firestarter, which was really bad. But this is the first, like, Zac Efron role that I have seen in a while, and he really surprised me with this. He gives such an amazing performance as Kevin, and like, it's just tragic. He brings so much depth to the character. You really feel him as a person in this film, and he's kind of, obviously the emotional anchor of the entire film. He truly is the main character, and I think that is really impressive. We also have Jeremy Allen White, which I was really looking forward to. I love him. He's so good in everything. He brings so much energy. I also thought it was really funny he's not in like the first 20 minutes of this film, and at first I was like, oh no, is he not going to be in very much? Then it cuts to him in like this epic shot, and I'm like, yeah, he's here. But man, in general, all of the brothers are fantastic, and they have such good chemistry with each other that it's just that much more heartbreaking to watch. They are so, so good in this. Going back to the fact that it's a biopic, that's really interesting, specifically a biopic about the themes and story that this is about, because I had not heard this story, but this is just a brutal story. This is really a brutal story to cover. So much so that they actually had to cut an entire person out of the story because it would have just been too much for the film. It literally would have been too heavy. It would be an unpleasant experience, even more so than it already was, but straight up just bad if they had kept that character in from the real story, because there's just so much here. And with that, I was really impressed with this film's tact and its maturity in looking at all of its themes, especially when dealing in like a modern sense with a character like their dad. I don't remember the actual dad's name, but it's so easy to just make a character like that into a cartoon villain, making him just as evil as can be, and they did not do that here. They kept surprisingly toned back with just how much they showed of his abuse and damage that he did to them, and in a really realistic way, in a way that makes it a lot more insidious and palatable for what this actually looks like in real life. The amount of stuff that he did to his sons was so subtle and so interesting to look at in this context, and it really brings home its own super powerful message beyond just being a biopic, which I really appreciate. They also have like the guts, I think, because I think not many films do this, and that's a shame because I think it's one of the coolest things film can do, to portray a bit more of like a supernatural side of this in terms of showing an afterlife and different elements like that. And that's some of the most touching and like grounding things that this movie brings, because a lot of what makes this story work as a biopic is that it doesn't feel like you're just watching tragic event, tragic event, tragic event. Where the film actually thrives are its tiny moments. Its little camera angle shots of a character sitting in a corner, or an open shot of a field, and all of these different things. It pulls you into the actual world that this film is taking place in. It's really, really strong and really, really like engaging and compelling because of the direction it takes to kind of underplay a lot of its moments and not baby the audience. Speaking of the audience, though, I was watching this film and I have engaged with this kind of wrestling about 0% in my entire life, which I was really, really shocked, because this just isn't my kind of thing, how engaged I was in the wrestling scenes in this movie, which is both a props to the writing, the directing, the performances, the cinematography, the editing. Everything about the wrestling sequences are fantastic. I think it's honestly some of the best like on-screen fighting kind of things, like not like punch Tom Cruise style, but like sports fighting I have seen since Raging Bull, like straight up. And Raging Bull I think has such interesting stylized fighting, and while this isn't as stylized as something like Raging Bull, it's so engaging, it's so interesting. That opening title sequence fight is just incredible, and also of course drives home the whole the dad has a claw in the family. But like the fights, man, I was engaged in every single one of them. They make them feel so painful and so important to all of these characters. Each fight brings so much emotional stakes. I was glued to the screen. In fact, I was glued to the screen this entire movie. I did not run into the Ferrari problem. I was lost in this film the moment it got going, which is super impressive, especially with a subject that I know very little about and care very little about. But really, just honestly, one of the big strong points of this is just its script. I don't know how that is with something like this, because biopics are so easy to be kind of light, boring, and weird, and almost Wikipedia-esque with their scripts. Even Ferrari kind of feels that way. But this just doesn't. It's paced so well, and the cinematography and direction just know exactly how to portray all of the moments. I honestly don't have too much to talk about with this film, just because I think it nails so much on, like, right on, and I don't have particular personal comments on its themes or the context of the narrative that it's bringing in. Again, I don't know much about wrestling. This is the first time I've engaged with the story, and obviously it's a biopic, so it's slightly different. Again, they even dropped one of the brothers. But especially as a brother and as a guy, this is an important one to watch thematically, what it's doing, what it has to say. The final scene with Kevin and his sons is a little cheesy, but it works for what this film is doing. And it really is an important message, especially for people in sports lives to hear. I grew up with some people who were super into sports, and I would love for them to watch this movie, because like the way that they were into sports because of their parents, that affects people. And we've got to be more aware of how we're treating masculinity, especially in the sports realm, which is another one of the reasons these movies pair so well together, is they're both largely about the trappings of masculinity. Ferrari covers this much more in an industrial and corporate and legacy side of things, but this movie captures that on a family side and on a really personal, intimate level, what unhealthy looks at masculinity can do to a person. And it's so powerful, and it's so good. It's not perfect either. It also has some pacing problems. Like, I was ready for the film to wrap up about 20 minutes before it did, and although the last 20 minutes are fantastic, I was just like, things are a little wonky here. There could have been definitely a better version of this film out there. But this is genuinely one of the best looking, best acted, best directed, best edited films I've seen in a while that isn't like the top tier, you know, if that makes sense. I also gave The Iron Claw a 4.5 out of 5. I cannot recommend this enough if you're okay with the subject matter, which again is extremely heavy. So be warned, don't go into this film if you don't know what it's going to be about. Yeah, it's rough. But yeah, you guys should go watch these in theaters. You really should. I'm too lazy to take that off and change it to something else. But yeah, these are great movies. I was really pleasantly surprised. They're not like the best movies I've ever seen, but I don't think every movie has to be the best movie I've ever seen, and I think these movies definitely deserve more love than they're getting. Though The Iron Claw is definitely bringing some love. I know a lot of people don't like Ferrari as much as I do, but I was just really impressed with what it was doing on a cinematic and thematic level. So yeah, great movies. Go watch a movie in theaters. Do it. Support your local theaters. It's awesome. Getting something like A-List, which I had this last year, I went to the theater, I believe it was 53 times last year, which is so cool. I've never done anything like that before. Like, A-List really is the only way I could have afforded to do that. So if you go to the theater a lot, getting a program like that is super duper helpful. Also, some fun things of note. I got the old boy 4K, which I'm using to prop up my light, and it's really cool. And I thought I would mention it, but now I'm realizing that it's propping up my light, and I can't show it. And also, lo and behold, per my last spoiler-free review, there is more May-December discourse, which is fun. An unfortunate bit of news came out, which they did not contact the actual guy that the story is based on, which they don't technically have to. It's not a biopic, technically speaking. It is inspired by, which, again, they were fully within their right to not contact him, but at the same time, he's fully in his right to think it's kind of messed up that they didn't. I really wish he was involved in the production to some extent. I think that could have made it a lot more interesting, even though I think it's already a fantastic film. But again, that kind of plays into what the movie is about. I don't think this really takes away from the film, but it's kind of a sucky thing to do. They shouldn't have done that. They should have talked to the guy. But whatever. May-December is fantastic. Go watch my review on that. But thank you guys for watching. I'm already working on my January main video. I knew what it was going to be about. It's technically a project that I have been working on all year, but it's not as cool as it sounds, so don't get your hopes up by saying I worked on it all year. But yeah, hopefully that'll be out. I'm about to leave the country in like 18 days. So that's crazy. Hopefully I'll have it finished up by then. If not, then it might be a little late. And we'll see how February goes. It's gonna be crazy. But again, thank you guys for watching. Let me know your thoughts on these movies. Let me know if you enjoy this series. It's less scripted, it's less edited, but it's fun to get to talk about movies I've seen in theaters and encourage you guys to go see them or give my opinions on them. Because again, can't really encourage anyone to go watch Saltburn. And May-December was pretty much only on Netflix. So this is the first one that's really been like, go watch these if you're okay with what's in them. But I love you all, and goodbye. Now, if you're like me, you went into the theaters this month, January, which Happy New Year, everyone. You went into
5 minutes later.
Now, if you're like me, you went into the theater this month thinking there's not really that much to watch. All the big December releases were just pushed out. My dog won't stop barking. And